The organisation Human Rights Watch has launched a new report looking at issues around human trafficking involving governments around the world. They find that in our country there are particular concerns, particularly around the treatment of migrants from other countries, how members of the LGBTQ community are treated, and then big issues around environmental rights. Mausi Segun is the Executive Director for Africa for Human Rights Watch. Mausi, good afternoon. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Firstly, the issue of migrants in South Africa. We often refer to them as foreign nationals. What problems are you pointing to there?
It's a number of issues. One, the first is just the treatment that they receive and the way that they are treated, not just within the communities, but the rhetoric that we continue to hear from political actors, and then the response from institutions who have the responsibility, one, to account for these individuals, whatever the reason they are in South Africa, their human rights remain intact. Whether they are migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, or just really people traveling through South Africa, none of that diminishes or takes away from the human rights. And the South African government must do a lot better than it's done over the past few years in protecting these rights.
We've seen this kind of thing in so many parts of the world. I mean, you see, if we call it xenophobia here, you would say the same thing in the United States, the same thing in Italy, in Europe, for example. Why is this happening? Is it just because more people are moving around?
Honestly, from our research, there is no evidence that the number of people who are making the decision to leave their homes have increased at any point in the last decade or beyond that. The fact is that the level of intolerance has gone to the highest level we've seen it in the last few years. One, many countries around the world continue and communities continue to face situations that enforce the fleeing and the relocation of people, including wars, environmental situations, climatic changes, lack of access to basic resources. There are many reasons why people would decide to move. A lot of it is involuntary. Some of it is voluntary. Whatever the reasons, the response is that those, unfortunately, if we talk about the United States of America, for example, or many other countries, even in Africa, have benefited, actually exist because of the migrant policy that is welcoming of people from other parts of the world. There is the diversity of the of humanity means that, and the freedom that is inherent in us as human beings to make decisions for ourselves. Now, I mean, that is not to say that governments and countries do not have the right to make laws, to regulate, and to ensure that the migration flows in and out of their countries is sustainable. But that does not mean abusing the rights for people who are migrating into or through their countries, whether it is, looking the other way and allowing impunity to reign when migrants are targeted by, other people in the community for killings, for torture, for destruction of their properties. It is a failure of government to ascribe, to abide by the human rights principles they ascribe to. Honestly, I have to say that Africa, that this is happening in Africa and in South Africa particularly is really disappointing. Africa has one of the most progressive legislation in terms of convention on refugee rights, migrants' rights, and internally displaced people across the world, across the globe. But the implementation is where we continue to fail our people. There must be an understanding that there are reasons why people would leave. Whether or not their applications to stay or remain is approved is a decision for the governments to make. But protecting their rights is not an option.
Environmental rights in South Africa, and you'll know, and you point to this, there's some areas with lots of pollution, there's climate change. Some parts of Mpumalanga have a lower life expectancy simply because of the coal-fired power stations around there. Where do you believe our society is failing to implement and to properly enforce human rights around issues around the environment?
Honestly, it will start from the education that needs to happen. There is a failure to educate people that could be impacted by environmental factors that flow out of a lot of economic activities, including the extractive industry. Mining in itself carries with it so many factors that contribute to the pollution of the environment, pollution of the air that people breathe in, the water that they drink, and government. A lot of the extraction is carried out by private companies and corporations, but the role of government is to regulate and to ensure that their own obligation towards the people, the ordinary people that are caught in the midst of all of this, is not abridged. And this is what we're seeing in South Africa. Some of these mines have been abandoned, and they have failed to do proper remediation. They have failed to do proper cleanup to ensure that they do not pose dangers to people around the communities around those disused mines, especially children and other vulnerable people. We have seen, governments not only ignoring these issues, but deliberately targeting those who speak up. Those who speak up on behalf of the communities, whether as community members themselves or as those who are interested and have the knowledge and the information. Not everyone has the information, but the few who do, they're doing a speaking up at the risk of their lives. This should not be so. Governments must respect the rights of people and individuals, groups, organizations who understand the implications and the impact of some of these environmental pollutions and environmental catastrophes that are affecting human lives and livelihoods, to speak up and work with them, to find ways to ameliorate it. We're not saying that they are simple answers to the cleanups. They are not simple answers to ensuring the environment, but there are steps that have been recognized and accepted by many of these countries, but they continue to fail when it comes to implementation and to ensuring that those who are speaking up are not facing reprisals, and that when the courts and other judicial mechanisms speak to enforce the rights of these people, actual enforcement that is in the hands of the executive becomes a reality.
Mausi Segun, thank you very much indeed, Executive Director for Africa for Human Rights Watch. Do appreciate the time.